The Dominion Empire had conquered hundreds of worlds. Their fleets were massive, their technology far beyond anything primitive planets could resist. And now they had set their sights on Earth. Supreme Commander Vorlax stood on the bridge of his flagship, Dominator, staring at the blue-green dot in the distance. "This planet will fall within hours," he declared. His officers nodded in agreement. The Dominion fleet consisted of 1,000 warships, each armed with the most powerful weapons known to their empire. Their plan was simple: bypass Mars, surround Earth, and unleash destruction. The fleet moved at high speed, shields active, weapons ready. But as they neared Mars' orbit, something strange happened. "Commander," an officer reported, frowning at his console, "we are losing contact with our forward scouts." Vorlax turned sharply. "What do you mean, losing contact?" The officer hesitated. "The ships, they are disappearing from our sensors." Vorlax clenched his fists. "Impossible. Are they under attack?" "No explosions, no distress signals," the officer replied. "They are just gone." The bridge went silent. The Dominion had fought many wars, but never had ships vanished without a trace. Vorlax refused to believe in superstition. He ordered the fleet to slow down and scan the area. Minutes passed. More ships vanished. The fleet's left flank completely disappeared. Dozens of warships gone in seconds. Then a distress call came through. "This is Warship Steltor. Something is here. We can't see it, but..." The signal cut off. A wave of unease spread through the fleet. Even the battle-hardened officers felt a chill run down their spines. Vorlax gritted his teeth. "Deploy long-range drones. I want answers." The drones launched, racing ahead into the blackness of space. Their cameras and sensors scanned everything. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then the footage showed a shadow moving through space. Not a ship, not a weapon. Just darkness, shifting unnaturally, as if space itself was alive. Before anyone could react, the drones also disappeared. A deep, unnatural silence settled over the fleet. It was not the silence of empty space. It felt wrong, unnatural, predatory. For the first time in his career, Supreme Commander Vorlax felt fear. He turned to his officers. "Prepare for emergency retreat." But before the fleet could turn back, the lights flickered. A presence was here. And the invasion fleet had no idea what they had just awakened. Panic spread through the Dominion fleet like a wildfire. The disappearance of their warships defied every law of warfare they knew. No debris, no explosions, no wreckage, just silent, instant erasure. It was as if the universe itself had decided to erase them. Supreme Commander Vorlax gripped the edges of his command chair, his claws digging into the metal. His officers were murmuring in hushed, nervous tones. This wasn't a battle. It was something else. "Status report," Vorlax barked. An officer's trembling voice responded. "We've lost 127 ships, Supreme Commander. No sign of enemy activity. No energy signatures." He hesitated before adding, "It's like they never existed." Vorlax's jaw clenched. His fleet was the largest and most advanced the Dominion had ever assembled. No species, no resistance force, no hidden Earth weapon could do this. "Deploy all scout ships," he ordered. "Full sensor suites. I want to know what's out there." The fleet's scout vessels shot forward, scanning everything in their path. Every data feed was streamed directly to Dominator's command bridge. For a moment, nothing unusual appeared. The void of space stretched endlessly before them. Mars hung in the distance, red and lifeless, offering no explanation. Then one of the scouts detected something moving, but it wasn't on the visible spectrum. "It's a distortion," an officer muttered. He enhanced the image. A faint ripple in space flickered across the screen, like heat waves rising from a desert. "Is it a cloaked vessel?" Vorlax asked. The officer shook his head. "No known stealth technology behaves like this." He ran more scans. "It's not reflecting light. It's absorbing it. A chilling realization settled over them. Something was hiding in the darkness, consuming everything it touched. A new transmission came through. One of the scout pilots, his voice laced with terror. "Command, it's right in front of me. I don't know what I'm looking at." Static. The ship disappeared. Every scout ship was lost within seconds. "Bring the fleet to full alert." Vorlax roared. "We will not be hunted like animals." Every warship activated its shields and primed its weapons, but what were they supposed to fire at? There was no enemy to see, no target to lock onto. Then, another shock rippled through the fleet. Their sensors started failing. The Dominion ships relied on advanced quantum tracking, able to detect even the smallest space debris. But now, entire sectors of space went dark. Ships lost contact with one another. Crews shouted in confusion as their navigation systems glitched. It was happening again. Another 100 ships vanished. This time, the survivors heard something before they disappeared. A low, humming sound, like the whisper of an ancient force waking from slumber. Vorlax's hands trembled. This wasn't a battle. This wasn't an invasion. They had stumbled into something they were never meant to find. The command bridge of the Dominator was filled with an eerie silence. Supreme Commander Vorlax had seen countless battles, had conquered dozens of worlds, but nothing in his existence prepared him for this. His fleet, the largest the Dominion had ever assembled, was being erased from existence. No enemy weapons, no signs of an attack, just ships vanishing. Entire crews gone. No wreckage, no distress signals. A deep, uneasy dread crawled into his chest. "Report," he growled, trying to regain control. An officer's voice came through, shaking. "We've lost. Another 100 ships, Supreme Commander." No warning, no trace. Vorlax's fists clenched. He turned to his lead scientist, an elder strategist named Zhorik, whose 4 eyes were wide with horror. "What is happening to my fleet?" Zhorik swallowed hard. "I have analyzed every data stream. Supreme Commander, this is not an attack in the traditional sense." His claws danced over the console, pulling up various readings. "It is as if space itself is consuming our ships ****. Vorlax's spines bristled. "Explain." Zhorik exhaled slowly. "The disturbances we detected earlier, the strange distortions, are not random anomalies. They are expanding zones where space behaves differently." He hesitated before saying, "It's almost as if reality is being rewritten around those points." Vorlax's patience wore thin. "You speak in riddles, Zhorik." Zhorik's voice grew urgent. "Supreme Commander, I am saying that our ships are not being destroyed. They are being removed from existence itself." The bridge fell into stunned silence. Vorlax's claws tapped against his chair. "Then tell me how to stop it." Zhorik hesitated, his mandibles twitching. "I don't know if we can." Before Vorlax could respond, alarms blared across the ship. More ships were disappearing, but this time they could hear something before it happened. A deep, vibrating hum filled the communications channels. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It wasn't natural. It was something else. Something ancient. Something that had been waiting. Then one of the remaining ships, the Crimson Fang, sent out a final, chilling transmission before disappearing. "They see us." Then silence. The Crimson Fang was gone. Panic spread through the remaining fleet. Some captains began issuing retreat orders, despite no official command from Vorlax. Others tried to activate emergency jumps, but they failed. "Supreme Commander," an officer stammered. "Our jump drives, they aren't responding." Vorlax rose from his seat, his body rigid. "Impossible." The officer's hands shook as he checked the controls again. "Something is holding us here." Vorlax's rage boiled. He was not a leader who panicked. He had crushed countless enemies, slaughtered species who had dared resist the Dominion's might. No force could stop him, and yet he was trapped. "Activate full weapons systems," he growled. Fire everything we have into the void. I want to know what we're fighting. Missiles launched. Energy cannons unleashed waves of plasma. Ion torpedoes detonated. Every weapon in the Dominion's arsenal was fired blindly into the blackness ahead. The explosions illuminated space for a brief moment, revealing nothing but emptiness. Then the hum returned. Louder, deeper. The bridge crew covered their ears as the sound vibrated through the hull of the Dominator. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The ship's systems shut down. For the first time in his life, Supreme Commander Vorlax felt something foreign, something he had never allowed himself to experience. The Dominator floated in eerie silence, its once bright displays now dark. Emergency lights flickered along the corridors, casting long, unsettling shadows over the command bridge. The hum, the deep, unnatural vibration, continued to pulse through the ship's very structure. It wasn't just sound. It was something more, something alive. Supreme Commander Vorlax stood frozen, his claws gripping the armrests of his command chair. His fleet, the greatest armada the Dominion had ever assembled, had been reduced to nothing. No enemy ships, no visible weapons, just vanishing vessels and an ever-present growing void. Torek, the lead scientist, struggled to stabilize the data feeds. His four eyes darted between screens that blinked with erratic, incomprehensible readings. "Supreme Commander," he said in a hoarse voice, "whatever this force is, it is growing stronger." Vorlax clenched his jaw. "How much time do we have?" Jorik hesitated, then answered, "Minutes. Maybe less." The Supreme Commander's gaze swept over his remaining officers. Panic had spread like an infection. Some whispered prayers to their gods. Others simply stared at their screens, hoping for a logical answer that would never come. No one panics. Vorlax's voice was sharp, cutting through the fear in the air. "We are the Dominion's finest warriors. We will not die trembling like prey." His words steadied some, but the truth was unavoidable. They were losing this battle, and they didn't even know what they were fighting. A sudden chime rang through the bridge. A message received. Vorlax's eyes narrowed. "Who is transmitting?" An officer swallowed hard. "Supreme Commander, it's coming from our own fleet." Vorlax stepped forward. "Play it." A garbled voice crackled over the speakers, distorted and unnatural. But beneath the interference, it was clear. It was one of their own. "We see them now. We shouldn't have come here." The bridge fell into dead silence. Then, another voice, deeper, almost inhuman, whispered through the channel. "We warned you." The signal cut off. The hum grew louder. Vorlax's instincts screamed at him. "Retreat. Now. Find a way to break free from this force," he ordered. "Jorik, I don't care what you have to do. Get us out of here." Jorik's mandibles twitched as he frantically ran calculations. If we fire our hyperdrives at full power, even if they are being disrupted, we might be able to cause a rupture in subspace strong enough to push us free. Vorlax gave a sharp nod. "Do it." The ship's emergency systems flickered as Jorik rerouted every ounce of available energy into the hyperdrives. Sparks burst from overheating consoles. The ship groaned, its structure protesting against the sheer force being unleashed. "All ships still with us. Activate emergency hyperdrive on my mark." Vorlax commanded. One of the officers interrupted, his voice trembling. "Supreme Commander, some of our ships aren't responding." Vorlax turned sharply. "What?" The officer pointed at the main display. Several of their ships remained, but something was wrong. They weren't moving. They weren't doing anything. Their lights were off. Their engines were cold. Then, slowly, one of the darkened ships, the Iron Fang, began to rotate, not under its own power. Something else was moving it. The hum became a roar. The Iron Fang's hull ripped open as if unseen hands had torn it apart. There was no explosion, no debris, just nothingness. The bridge crew of the Dominator stared in horror. One of the officers broke. He tore off his headset. screamed, and tried to flee the bridge. But before he could reach the exit, his body convulsed. His form glitched like a broken hologram. Before he was gone. No sound, no body, just gone. More officers screamed, backing away from their consoles. Vorlax forced down his own fear. Zorik. Now. Zorik slammed his clawed fingers onto the final command. The Dominator's engines detonated with power. A blinding shockwave of energy erupted around the ship. Space itself seemed to tremble. For a moment, reality fractured, and the ship broke free. Everything went white. Then, silence. Vorlax gasped, struggling to adjust his vision. The displays flickered back to life. He looked around. They were still intact. They had escaped. But as the scanners reactivated, the crew fell into a new kind of horror. Their massive fleet, thousands of ships strong, was gone. Only 3 ships had made it out. And space behind them. Empty. No debris. No signs of battle. Just an expanse of nothingness, stretching endlessly. As if the invasion fleet had never existed. The Dominator drifted in the cold void, its systems struggling to recover from the desperate escape. The remaining 2 ships, the Blood Oath and the Fang of Dominion, barely held together, their hulls scorched from the violent hyperspace rupture. Inside the command bridge of the Dominator, Supreme Commander Vorlax stood in silence, staring at the empty void where his massive invasion fleet had once been. They were gone. Not destroyed. Not scattered. Erased. The crew was in chaos. Some officers had collapsed, their bodies trembling with the aftershock of what they had witnessed. Others whispered in hushed, terrified voices. None of them could understand what had happened. They had prepared for battle, against planetary defenses, against human warships. Instead, they had fought against something else, something they couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't understand. Vorlax clenched his fists. His mighty dominion, the conquerors of 1,000 worlds, had been brought to their knees before they even reached Earth. His mind raced. Was this some kind of human technology? A weapon far beyond anything they had ever imagined? If so, why had the humans never used it before? And why was there no sign of their lost fleet? Even when ships were obliterated, there were always remains, wreckage, bodies, something. But now, nothing. Zorik, the lead scientist, wiped sweat from his brow. His hands trembled as he worked on the damaged systems. He didn't look up as he spoke. Supreme Commander, the data doesn't make sense. Vorlax turned sharply. Explain. Zorik took a shaky breath. Before we escaped, the sensors picked up something we never detected before. Vorlax narrowed his eyes. What did we miss? Zorik hesitated, his mandibles twitching. Space itself shifted. I don't know how else to describe it. It's as if something folded reality, swallowed the fleet, and then closed the door behind them. A wave of unease spread through the bridge. The officers exchanged nervous glances. That's impossible, one of them muttered. Zorik turned to face him, his expression grim. That's what I thought. But the data suggests otherwise. He tapped on his console, bringing up distorted readings. We weren't being attacked by a weapon. We were being pulled into something else. Vorlax stepped closer, his claws tightening around the armrest of his command chair. What are you saying, Zorik? The scientist swallowed hard. I think the fleet didn't just disappear. I think they were taken. Silence fell over the bridge. Taken. The word lingered in the air like a poison. Vorlax's eyes darkened. His mind was trained for war, for strategy, for brute force solutions. But this was something else entirely. By whom? He asked, his voice low. Zorik shook his head. That's the problem. There's no sign of a who. It's like space itself rejected us. Another officer, still pale from the experience, muttered, maybe we weren't supposed to come here. The words struck Vorlax harder than he expected. Had they unknowingly trespassed into something beyond their understanding? Had they awakened something that was never meant to be disturbed? The Dominion prided itself on its strength. They had conquered countless species, crushed civilizations that dared resist. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was something waiting, and they had stepped into it unknowingly. Vorlax exhaled slowly. He had to act. If they simply returned to the Dominion and reported that their fleet had vanished into nothingness, the High Command would demand answers he didn't have. He had two choices: retreat in shame or investigate the truth. His pride screamed at him to push forward, but his instincts, sharpened by years of war, warned him against it. Then the Blood Oath sent out a distress signal. "Supreme Commander," an officer called out, voice tight with fear. "They're reporting movement." Vorlax spun toward the main display. "What kind of movement?" The officer hesitated. "They don't know, but something is out there, and it's coming closer." Vorlax's stomach turned to ice. He opened a channel to the Blood Oath. "What do you see?" For a moment, only static responded. Then a voice, shaky, barely more than a whisper. "It's not a ship." The bridge crew tensed. Vorlax leaned forward. "Then what is it?" A long pause. Then a chilling answer. "It's them." The channel went dead. And outside, in the endless void where the fleet had once been, something stirred. Panic spread across the bridge of the Dominator like wildfire. The crew frantically tried to re-establish communication with the Blood Oath, but the signal remained dead. Static filled the speakers, an eerie, unnatural hum that seemed to seep into their bones. Supreme Commander Vorlax stood frozen, his mind racing through possibilities. Was this an enemy they simply didn't understand? A human weapon beyond imagination? Or was it something older, something that lurked in the void, waiting for fools like them to stumble into its domain? A sharp beeping sound shattered the silence. "Supreme Commander," a technician called out. "The Blood Oath is moving, but it's not under its own power." The main screen flickered as they redirected the external cameras toward the distant ship. What they saw made the entire bridge go deathly silent. The Blood Oath, one of the last surviving Dominion warships, was being pulled backward into the darkness. There was nothing visible dragging it. No energy beams, no tractor fields. Just an unseen force dragging the massive warship into the cold abyss. The crew aboard the Dominator watched in horror as the ship's engines flared, trying to resist, but it was futile. "Open a channel to them," Vorlax barked. Static. A moment later, the signal cut through, filled with screaming. "Help us. We can't stop it." Then another voice, choked with terror. "It's inside." The bridge officers exchanged looks of pure fear. Inside. Inside what? Inside the ship. Inside reality itself. A sudden shriek of metal echoed over the comms, followed by wet, gurgling sounds. Then the screaming cut off. Silence. Then a whisper. "You shouldn't have come." The signal died. The Blood Oath vanished into the void. Gone. Vorlax's breath was shallow. His chest tightened with something he refused to name. Fear. The mighty Dominion had ruled the stars with brute force, but brute force meant nothing here. This was something else. And then, the Fang of Dominion, the last remaining ship in their fleet, began broadcasting a distress signal, but not in their language. It was in human standard. "Impossible," an officer whispered. "They wouldn't do that unless someone, or something, had taken control." The transmission played across the speakers. At first, it was garbled. Then, the words became clear. "We thought we were hunters, but we were prey all along." A hollow laugh echoed through the bridge, coming from the speakers. The crew recoiled. The laugh wasn't Dominion. It wasn't human. It was something else. The Fang of Dominion's engines ignited at full burn, but it wasn't moving away from them. It was coming toward them. Evasive maneuvers, Vorlax shouted. The ship's pilot tried to steer away, but something was overriding the controls. The fang of Dominion was locked onto them, accelerating at impossible speeds. Then, as it closed the distance, it vanished. One moment, it was there. The next, it was gone. Not destroyed, not obliterated, erased. A deathly hush fell over the Dominator. 3 ships, 3 warships, gone. The only thing left was silence and the deep, chilling void. Then, a whisper on the open comms. Not human, not Dominion. Something else, something ancient, something that had been waiting. Run. Vorlax didn't hesitate. Get us out of here. Now. The Dominator turned, engines roaring as they fled. But even as they escaped, as the ship surged away from that cursed place, Vorlax knew the truth. They hadn't survived. They had been allowed to leave. The Dominator surged through space at maximum speed, its engines burning hotter than ever before. The crew sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the void behind them, half expecting it to swallow them whole. Supreme Commander Vorlax gripped the armrests of his command chair, his claws digging into the metal. His mind was still struggling to process what had just happened. 3 of the Dominion's most powerful warships gone. Not destroyed, not even defeated, just erased. And the worst part, he didn't even know what had taken them. Status, he demanded, his voice rough. Engine stable. No signs of pursuit, the helmsman reported, though he sounded far from relieved. We are approaching the edge of Mars' orbit. Mars, the very planet they had laughed at, considering it nothing more than a stepping stone to Earth. Now it felt like salvation. Vorlax exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. They had to get back to the Dominion, had to warn them, had to tell them never to come back. A deep silence filled the bridge. No one spoke. No one dared to. Then, the lights flickered, the screens glitched, and a familiar, bone-chilling sound filled the air. Static. Every officer on the bridge stiffened. The static came from the main comms system, twisting and warping into something that almost resembled a voice, a garbled whisper echoing through the speakers. You left them behind. Vorlax's blood ran cold. No, he growled. Shut it off. Now. The communications officer scrambled to disable the transmission. He pressed several buttons. Nothing happened. The whisper continued, growing clearer. You left them behind. You ran. You abandoned them. Vorlax's claws dug deeper into his chair. Shut it down. I'm trying. The officer nearly shouted. It won't. The whisper cut through again. It's still here. Every screen on the bridge snapped to life. And what they saw made their stomachs drop. The Fang of Dominion. The last warship that had vanished without a trace. Floating just ahead of them, completely intact. But something was wrong. The ship's hull was twisted, stretched, warped in ways that shouldn't have been possible. It was as if reality itself had broken apart and stitched it back together wrong. No, someone whispered. On the main screen, the ship's lights flickered, and then something moved inside. Shapes, shadows, twisting, shifting, watching. Then the ship's comms flared to life, broadcasting to the Dominator. A voice came through. Help us. It was not Dominion. It was not human. It was something else, something that had learned how to sound like them. Vorlax's breath caught in his throat. The Fang of Dominion's engines suddenly ignited, and the ship moved toward them. Full reverse, Vorlax shouted. The Dominator's engines flared, pushing them backward. But as they moved, the Fang matched their speed perfectly. Then, the whisper returned. You shouldn't have run. Vorlax's heart pounded. A dark shape shifted inside the Fang, moving toward its bridge window. And then, they saw it, a figure staring at them from the glass. It was not Dominion. It was not human. It was wrong. And it was smiling. The whisper came one last time. We are coming. Then, the fang of dominion vanished. Not in an explosion. Not in a hyperspace jump. Just gone. Silence filled the bridge. No one spoke. No one could. The Dominator kept moving, accelerating away from Mars, from Earth, from everything. And yet, deep in his gut, Supreme Commander Vorlax knew one terrible truth. They hadn't escaped. Whatever was out there had let them leave. And one day, it would come for them, too.